Is bigger always better in a game of evolution? To answer that, I did what any reasonable person would do. I spent 2 years building an entire digital ecosystem from scratch. I created three tribes of animals: tiny rabbits, medium goats, and huge cows, gave them upgradable genetic code and a simple goal: survive. In this video, we'll first run a control group of each species, seeing how they evolve completely alone to establish a baseline. Then, we'll drop them all into Digital Thunderdome for a brutal free for all. We're going to watch them adapt and compete, and by the end, you'll understand the surprising rules that dictate when being bigger is the ultimate advantage and when it's a death sentence. So, in our last experiment, we dropped a bunch of identical rabbits into a world and watched them evolve. The big takeaway was that even without predators, simple competition for food was enough to drive incredible adaptation. The rabbits who were faster, had better eyesight, and were more efficient survived. The rest did not. Now, for anyone new here, welcome. Here is a 60-second crash course on how this all works. The name of the game in this simulation is simple: eat plants to fill your stomach. A full stomach allows you to reproduce. The only way to lose is by starving to death. When an animal reproduces, its baby has a chance to spend gene points to upgrade a specific trait. They can get faster, see further, or improve their metabolic efficiency to burn food slower. The catch is the better suited animals will be more likely to survive, passing their genes on to the next generation. This is evolution in action. The best genetic builds will dominate the population over time. If you want a full deep dive on all the mechanics and individual gene specifics, I highly recommend checking out the first video linked in the description. Now that we got to basics, let's ask the question why we're all here. What happens when all the competitors aren't the same? Specifically, what happens when they're different sizes? We'll introduce two new species alongside our rabbits: medium-sized goats and large cows. Each is bigger and needs more food, but they also have access to a wider menu. Rabbits can eat only dandelions, goats can eat dandelions and berry bushes, and cows can eat it all, including rare but lucrative apple trees. The catch is the bigger you are, the more kilocalories you burn. So while a dandelion may feed a rabbit, it does almost nothing for a cow. The stage is set for a freeway evolutionary war based on size. Let's see what happens. First up, the rabbits. I dropped them in and their population graph did exactly what you expect: a massive initial boom followed by a massive crash. Over time, the cycles got smaller and the population stabilized at a surprisingly high level. I looked at the genetic code to see how they pull this off. They barely poured points into speed and perception, which makes sense. You gotta find the food and you gotta get there fast before other rabbits do. Unsurprisingly, this behavior is exactly identical to that from the previous video, with one key difference. This time, they also decided to dump point after point to metabolic efficiency. Contrary to what I expect from the real world, they barely touched the have more babies button, and that's when it clicked. The biggest threat to the rabbit in a world with no predators or other species isn't being caught, it's the inevitable famine that comes from a feast that is produced by other rabbits. They evolved not into simple breeding machines, but onto incredibly efficient foragers. After all, since they're competing amongst each other, producing more rabbits produces more competition. They've evolved to quickly find food and then ride out the famine while they search for more. Next up, the heavyweights, the cows. They have the ability to eat anything they come across, but only berries and apple trees will actually sustain them. Observing their population graph, we see them reach a limit, then go up and down around it without actually booming or busting like the rabbits did. The reason for that is because they take a very long time to produce a single offspring, meaning their corrections have a delayed effect. This prevents them from overproducing very quickly and then starving up all the food. This is a textbook K strategy. The K stands for carrying capacity, the absolute maximum number of creatures the environment can reliably support. The cows found that limit and just vibed there, increasing their numbers when it fell below the capacity and reducing when it went above. Their evolution was also a slow burn. They grabbed some speed early on to traverse a large map, but their cleverest adaptation was to slightly reduce gestation time. Since the cows had the longest birth rate of all the animals, they're the ones who have benefited the most from shortening it by a percentage. Also, while the animal is pregnant, it burns significantly more energy than when it is not, so they are able to save much more energy this way. As their population matured, they became so effective at eating everything that the total amount of plant life in the simulation actually dropped and stabilized the new, lower level. They weren't just living in their world, they were shaping it. They have become the case strategist landscapers, terraforming the digital planes to perfectly suit their needs. Note that unlike rabbits, which took 3,000 turns to use up all 6 of their gene points, cows fail to do so even up to 9,000 turns. The reason for this is that small animals like rabbits produce many offsprings in a short period of time, which don't live very long. This forces them to constantly adapt and rapidly find the best genes for the current situation. Meanwhile, cows produce one baby at over 3 times the duration. Coupled with being able to eat everything means that there wasn't much selective pressure in their environment. This causes the evolution to slow down, which could be a fatal weakness. And finally, we have the goats, stuck in the middle. If the rabbits are R strategy breeding machines and the cows are K strategy titans, the goats are the cool generalists. They reproduce faster and with more offspring than cows do, and unlike rabbits, they're also able to access the berry bushes with the side of dandelions. One could say they're the jack of all trades. Their population graph supports this story, showing signs of both the initial boom and bust that rabbits had, but also the slow mating cycle around the carrying capacity that cows had. One could say they seem to have inherited the worst of both. And their genetic strategy shows how this was done. They poured every single point they could into just two stats: speed and perception. Everything else was completely ignored. Why? Because their generalist diet of dandelions and bushes created an inherently unpredictable world. Their food supply is always in a flux. Their main food source, the berry bushes, is constantly contested by the other goats. and it regrows slower than the rabbit's dandelions do. Because of this, they can't afford to settle into the calm efficiency of the rabbits or the slow and steady strategy of mowing everything down as the cows do. Their only viable path was to become unstable opportunists. They are built for one thing and one thing only: a frantic, endless search for whatever food source is available, preferably bushes, right now. So, after each of our three isolated simulations, a clear picture emerges for each species' ideal sole strategy. Let's break it down. Rabbits put points into speed and metabolic efficiency. Their goal was to find food quickly and then conserve as much of that energy as possible for the inevitable famine. The cows mostly put their points everywhere all at once. They play for the long game, slowly growing populations with the environment's absolute limit. They're also the only creature who tried putting points into litter count. Lastly, we have the goats, who put points into speed and perception. They have a strategy of constant searching for food, pouring everything into finding and reaching the next meal as fast as possible. Each species has a unique build perfectly suited to its own private world. They are similar in some things, such as valuing speed, but different in others, such as valuing perception and metabolic efficiency. But now it's time for the main event. We'll drop all these species into the arena together and let natural selection sort them out. And what happens first is an immediate universal arms race. The moment the simulation begins, the arena erupts into chaos. The rabbits and goats immediately start multiplying, and the first move in this new competitive world is universal: speed. They pour the first pressure gene points into getting faster because the rule is simple. If you can't get to the food before the other guy, no other adaptation matters. This ignites a direct conflict between the rabbits and the goats, a cage match for the dandelions they both need to survive. In nature, there's a ruthless rule for this kind of conflict, called the competitive exclusion principle. It means that when two species fight for the same limited resource, they can't coexist forever. One of them has to lose. Welcome to the Dandelion War. At first, the rabbits try brute force strategy, pouring points into bigger litters to simply outnumber everyone. That fails miserably, leading to a massive population crash for both sides. So the survivors tried a different, less self-destructive approach. They refound those points and dumped them into metabolic efficiency. And this is the genius move. They realized they couldn't outbreed the goats, so they decided to outsurvive them. Their new strategy was basically, we'll get the same amount of food as you, but we'll make it last longer. Their smaller bodies meant they make a single dandelion last longer. Paired with the genes of metabolic efficiency, they could last a really long time on little small amounts of food. They'd strip an area of dandelions and then just wait, calmly sipping on their energy reserves while the less efficient goats starved around them. It's brutal, which is how you know it's nature. And the goats, they never stood a chance. They were squeezed from two directions in a classic case of asymmetric competition. From below, the hyper-efficient rabbits were outlasting them for every last dandelions, and from above, the cows were casually munching on the berry bushes the goats desperately needed as a backup plan. They were the jack of all trades, but master of none. And in this brutal game, that's a death sentence. And just like that, the dandelion war was over. The goat population collapses, and the rabbits take the throne as the current kings of the ecosystem, reigning supreme in numbers even above the cows. The rabbits drew out the goats, becoming the undisputed kings of the lowlands. So that's it then. The rabbits have won. They successfully drove their main rival and stand as the undisputed champions of the ecosystem. This is an undeniable proof that being small is the best. Wait, what is that? Turns out that while the rabbits and the goats were locked in a desperate war for survival, the cows were operating on a completely different level. They weren't concerned with the frantic scramble for dandelions. That low energy food was beneath them. You see, the cows have an ace up their sleeve, something we call niche security. The exclusive ability to eat rare, high energy apple trees. This private food supply allowed them to stay completely out of the dandelion war. But here's a twist in the story, the truly genius part. The moment the goats were wiped out, the cow population started to skyrocket. And it was no coincidence. The rabbits, in their ruthless campaign, had inadvertently done the cows a massive favor. They had completely eliminated the one and only other animal that competed for the berry bushes. With the entire mid-tier food source now completely uncontested, the cows had secured a reliable, powerful fuel source to power the growth. In ecology, this is called competitive release. One species' removal frees up resources for another. And this is where the rabbits' victory became a curse. They hadn't just won a war, they had unleashed a new, far more dangerous rival. The growing cow herds acted like massive land mowers. While their main targets were the trees and the bushes, they would graze onto any dandelions in their path, not for major sustenance, but simply because they were there. For rabbits, the war became a much harder place to live. Suddenly, their primary food source was being casually eaten by giants, creating an indirect competition they couldn't possibly win. It's a perfect example of a chain reaction. The rabbits destroyed the goats, who were the only ones keeping the cows in check. In doing so, they created an enemy they could never compete with, a chilling reminder that eliminating just one species can send shockwaves throughout the entire ecosystem. The rabbits tried to fight back by even taking some points from perception and putting more into metabolism, in a desperate attempt to squeeze out every last juice from their only food source, but it was a sinking ship. By the end of the simulation, they had rejoined the goats in the endangered species, while the cows claimed the land. So, what is the real science of size? Our simulations show that the advantage of being big isn't brute strength, it's security. The cows use their size to access an exclusive niche, allowing them to patiently wait out the chaotic war between the small species. In contrast, the rabbits use their small size and fast reproduction to quickly adapt to the low-tier food web and win the direct battle. This was quite a surprise for me since I expected the cows to invest in metabolic efficiency and rabbits into litter count, which is a typical arcade selection theory that we see in real life. This shows that evolution doesn't necessarily follow predetermined laws, but whatever works, and something that works in the short term may not be optimal in the longer term. The rabbits' victory against the goats was such an example. By wiping out the goats, they secured a food source in the shorter run, but screw themselves in the long term. We will see this behavior more often once we introduce predators in the future videos. So far, our creatures had it pretty easy by reproducing all on their own, but we're missing the single biggest complication in all biology. What happens when survival isn't just about finding a food, but also finding a partner? How will evolution change when creatures need to not just be efficient, but also attractive to pass on their genes? We'll find out when we introduce mating and sexual selection in the next video. If you got ideas for crazy new genes or crazy experiments you'd like to see, drop them in the comments. I read all of them. Until then, thanks for watching.